There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Biden.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon. And as you can see, I didn't take him off the screen. And with me tonight is retired NYPD Sergeant, what's your name again? Mike Geary, also Professor Mike Geary, who just incidentally also has a law degree. So he's also our legal expert. You know, folks, we've been following the Stephen Smith case, and now really there's more things going on in the investigation. But we also have to realize that this occurred nearly 8 years ago. And now attorney Eric Bland is putting him and attorney Ronnie Richter, who are basically working for Sandy Smith, are putting together now an investigative who's who, a real strong investigative team to reinvestigate this. And they've already gotten the green light. They've already exhumed the body. But what are we really expecting them to find by doing an autopsy, a new autopsy? Well, what a smart investigator, of course, would do is they wouldn't just disregard the initial autopsy. Of course, they would start at that point. What did the initial pathologist find out? And let's build from there. And if we find anything differently that can change the opinion of this, there's a lot of contradictions in this case, tremendous amount of contradictions. You know, right away, the pathologist ruled that this was a motor vehicle accident, a hit and run, with absolutely no evidence from the scene that indicated that. No parts of the vehicle, no broken lenses, no broken mirrors, which he said he was probably hit in the back of the head with a truck mirror. But there is no physical evidence at the scene that would indicate that. Many other things are very strange about this investigation. The fact that Stephen's cell phone was in his front pocket, that wasn't broken. He didn't sustain injuries that were consistent with being hit by a motor vehicle. Another thing that's very, very strange is that they did a rape kit on Stephen as part of the investigative autopsy. That's very unusual for a hit and run motor vehicle accident. So what other information did they have from the scene that they're withholding right now? So these are some of the questions that we have, and I don't know if they have the answers right now. So I personally don't expect them to come up with new smoking gun information from the autopsy. I really don't. I don't think that they're going to be able to say, oh, this was definitely not a hit and run vehicle accident. This was blunt trauma caused by a baseball bat. They don't even have his clothing anymore. I don't even know if they safeguarded his clothing, which would have been at least, preserve the evidence, because there could have been DNA on his clothing, but it was left unattended. So at the very least, if they do have it, it might not be worth anything because the chain of custody was broken. So that's a huge thing in this case. So with all of these things, and now we and everyone on this case has been criticized by putting forth rumor, but you cannot disregard the rumors on this because there's not a lot of facts that were put forward. And one of the things that I heard Eric Bland say, and we'll play it a little bit later in this broadcast, is that the Murdochs had a stranglehold over this area and that they were afraid to come out. So what does that tell you? Does that leave conjecture and rumor to run rampant? Mike?
Yeah, Billy, there was so much done wrong at the very beginning of this, that you had highway patrol coming there, it's SLED coming in, SLED kind of saw that, they were offering their expertise. Then when they realized, after the pathologist made their the assessment, SLED stepped away. Highway then got into a little bit of a pissing match with the coroner's office, And it turned into a big cluster freak right off the bat, unfortunately. And you've got then Mrs. Smith, poor Mrs. Smith, who's just lost her son. She's been apparently was inundated with a bunch of phone calls dealing in like second party rumor, and that kind of let moved kind of people started looking into Buster Murdoch. But the problem is there wasn't anything objectively to connect him to it, like phone calls that they knew from Stephen Smith's phone. The phone was ended up gone. We think possibly the Murdochs may have gotten it. Mr. Murdoch is there, looking for as an attorney or as a concerned father, thinking his son may be a suspect in this case. It was a big cluster freak off the bat. And now you have to deal with that 7 years later. You can hope for some new evidence, but I don't think anybody should get their hopes up about this at all.
Mike, neither you or I, or pretty much anyone on this investigation, other than actual pathologists and maybe crime scene detectives, are experts on the forensic in this case. But I don't have a huge amount of faith that doing an autopsy almost 8 years later is going to produce evidence that you're going to say, oh, this is what it is. We changed the whole thing. It's clear that it was this and not that. I mean, first of all, to differentiate between blunt trauma from a bat and blunt trauma from being hit in the back of the head with, say, a truck mirror, I don't know, unless you have glass or particles from that truck mirror or pieces or this evidence from the bat left on the person who was struck. How do you differentiate that then, especially almost 8 years later?
Right. Billy, you would expect that if someone was hit with a car, part of a car, like a mirror or something like that, there's going to be tremendous trauma. They're going to be thrown pretty far. They're not going to be like laying down in the middle of the road. Just think of the momentum and the force behind a truck driving down the road, hitting someone. You're going to be, knocked pretty damn far. And to have that person sitting there, lying there in the middle of the road, without tire marks around them, you got to look at their clothing to see if there's any sort of paint chips or anything from the vehicle. All of that stuff has been lost. You talk about the chain of custody. A lot of people don't realize how important the chain of custody is to getting using evidence, perhaps having it introduced at trial. That's all lost. You gotta, any new investigation that begins with a brand new autopsy after the body has been exhumed can only begin where the old pathologist and the medical examiner's report left off. And 7 years later, there's not much left other than bones. I don't mean to be graphic, but there's not much left of the body after being 7 years in the ground.
Mike, you just answered Andy the Gabby
Oh, I'm
Cabby's
sorry.
question.
Okay.
What I want to know is how much of the body's left after all this time to examine. You just hit it on the head. There's bones left.
There's bones. Yeah. There's not much left. There might be some tissue, some fragments, but it's not like a person say was if they died and they were embalmed. They died in 30 days later. But you're talking 7 years later. I'm sorry, I don't think you're going to get much evidence from what's left there.
No, you're not going to. And I hate to be this graphic, but you have
Right.
to be. Eric Bland, the attorney for Sandy Smith, we're going to play a little bit of him. He appeared on a news show. Let's see what he has to say here.
Case. We're going to find out what was the cause of death. That's the first thing. Rescind those death certificates, get new ones issued, get a new coroner's report issued, a new autopsy report issued, and then our investigators are going to hit the ground running. And whatever they find, we're going to turn over to SLED. And hopefully, the dam will break. Somebody says something. One thing Chief Keel said is he believes that there's 4 or 5 people that they have targeted that they believe have information that will lead to possibly the killer of Stephen. And he said the reason that they waited as long as they did was because the Murdochs had this kind of strangle.
Is that unbelievable, Mike? The Murdochs had a stranglehold
Right.
on this. So when people question us as to why you're putting forth these rumors, no, this is not a rumor. The Murdochs were a powerful family. As we just found out, they were tremendously corrupt. And I don't think Alec Murdoch is the only person in that family that was corrupt. If he was corrupt within this law firm, stole $8 to $12 million, how did he get away with that unless other people were turning their back?
That's right. That's right. People were looking the other way because they were getting something out of it. Either they were getting a cut out of it, or they were doing favors for Murdochs, and Murdochs were throwing business their way. The thing that hurts about this, the interview you just showed with Eric Bland, is he's overpromising, and I think this is probably what he said to poor Mrs. Smith. We're going to have new death certificates reissued. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. You're hoping that's a prayer, and that would be wonderful. But that would sound like something you'd see in a movie or a TV show that's made up. To rescind a death certificate and I don't know, and I don't see it, and I hope that the poor Smith family isn't pinning every hope on what Mr. Bland is saying, because I don't think this is going to come to fruition. I really don't.
Let me finish playing the rest of this.
Hold on the community down there. The people were afraid to talk. And he thinks now with the conviction that there is a high likelihood that people are less reticent to talk.
What do you want to tell those people?
I want to tell them, come forward. Have the courage and the
So come forward, have the courage to come forward.
decency. If you know information, I really do believe that the time is right for someone to come forward and really give that golden piece of information, because people talk. And I think there's things on phones and there's things on computers. Stephen was dating some powerful people from what I understand. And there would be communications between them, whether it would be via email or via text, something. And there was also something that was uncovered by SLED during the Murdoch murder investigation, which caused them in July of 2021 to reopen Stephen's investigation. So we shall see.
So interesting, right? Very interesting. However, again, when people say, "Oh, this is all rumor," there is more than rumor here. There is definitely more than rumor. However, what we named this episode we're doing here is two persons of interest with a big question mark, because those persons of interest, and I love the way the regular news does it. Breaking news. They had this information in 2015.
8 years ago.
Right. It was just never released. So it wasn't really breaking information. So it's one of the things they're saying is that these two individuals, I think the names were Patrick Wilson and Sean Connolly.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They're all saying that this was not a vehicle accident. And this rumor or this conjecture is that one of them was driving a car and hit Stephen with the car. But I thought it wasn't a motor vehicle accident. So isn't that contradicting everything they're saying?
That's going to be a problem if the Smith family wants to sue someone civilly for the negligently causing the death of their son, or if the Smith family's hoping for a criminal prosecution of someone. You've got all of these contradictions. And remember, this is if it's civil or criminal, it'll go before a jury, and the jurors are going to have to decide, depending on, again, civil or criminal laws being applied. But you're going to have contradictions in testimony. You're going to have contradictions in official documents because, the highway patrol said one thing, the coroner said another. You've got, and rumors, if they were not ever substantiated with any sort of testimony, it sounds powerful, and it's important for leads for a criminal, as a detective like you and Phil, but, rumors can't make it into court, so it's, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I wish Mrs. Smith all the best, because she deserved justice, wherever it leads. And but I don't see this really uh, being any. I think this will probably end up being one of those cases where you can't make a determination. It's going to be probably whatever decisions and findings that were made, however contradictory to other law enforcement agencies. I think that's pretty much where it's going to stand, unless there's something really groundbreaking in Alex Murdaugh's phone. Other than that, I don't see it. The persons of interest, they've been known for 7 years. I don't see that anything new is really going to happen.
Mike, getting back to Eric Bland and how you said, oh, he's coming forth, like we got new this, a new death certificate, new autopsy, new investigators, a new fresh look at this. There's a book called Practical Homicide Investigation written by Vernon Gebert, and he always says, do it right the first time, because you don't get a second time. You don't get a second chance to do it. This investigation was bungled from the very beginning. And if, like Eric Bland is saying, the Murdochs had a stranglehold on the police on this investigation, that's deeply troubling. That is deeply troubling. And why did they have? What was their motive? So we got to think, that's got to make the minds of everyone following this case run away and say, well, what was their interest in this? And someone recently said, I think it was Ronnie Richter or one of the attorneys there, I don't want to put it in Ronnie Richter's mouth, but someone said, and it may have been Eric Bland, the Murdochs aren't ambulance chasers. In essence, they're a big, sophisticated law firm. And I said, no, they're not ambulance chasers. They're Brinks truck chasers. They're going after the big money, And I am bothered by the fact that why did Alec Murdoch and Randy Murdoch respond to this scene at 4:00 in the morning? What was that all about?
Are they just chasing an ambulance, or do they have a scanner? Did somebody give them a phone call, confidential phone call? It is weird, and it is absolutely suspicious. But unless you could develop it into something further, we don't know. But like Vernon Gebert, you got the textbook, I got it. It's an amazing book, but he's right. If the investigation is compromised and evidence is lost off the bat, you may never ever get it back. And it could be the fact that the person who is responsible, or the person or persons responsible for Mr. Smith's deaths, have covered their tracks. And I think we have to be prepared for that eventuality. Call me a cynic, but from being a cop, sometimes these things happen. If you don't do it right the first time, you don't get a second chance.
Yeah, is double or triple hearsay enough to establish probable cause to lock someone up? I don't think so either, Mike. No. Yeah. It's incredible, and it's incredible that this was allowed to happen. And now that, the big bad boogeyman is in prison, now all of a sudden everyone has the nerve to go forward with this case. But they were afraid back then, when it first occurred. Fitz News, they talk about evidence from the scene. And Fitz News is that great, they do an amazing documentary called The Murdoch Murders. Mm-hmm. And it's Mandy Matney. And I'm going to... they talk about evidence from the scene of this accident. Smith was found dead just before 4 a.m. on July 8th, 2015, in the middle of Sandy Run Road in Hampton County, South Carolina. No tire marks or no debris from a vehicle found on the scene after several searches. Stevens' loosely tied shoes were on his feet when he was found dead in the middle of the road. His car was found 3 miles away on Bamberg Highway with the gas cap off. Chain of custody apparently was broken when Stevens' clothes were left unattended at the funeral home. Horrendous mistake. Stevens' head was bruised and misshapen by blunt force. His shoulder was partially dislocated and had no other major injuries. Now, here's the dispute that the Fitz News claims about the hit and run theory. Investigators on the scene July 8th, 2015, went back and forth between a gunshot homicide and a hit and run accident. So the blunt trauma to his head looked like a gunshot. South Carolina Highway Patrol officers were told it wasn't a vehicular accident. They didn't have to be at the autopsy. At the autopsy, MUSC pathologist Dr. Erin Presnell ruled that Stephen was killed in a hit and run crash. Two South Carolina Highway Patrol investigators who spoke with Presnell described hostile experiences with the pathologist and couldn't get a direct answer for why she ruled Stephen's death a vehicle accident. The coroner said he didn't believe Stephen's death was a hit and run. The case was given to South Carolina Highway Patrol until 2021 when SLED opened an investigation. Now, all of this stuff is really, really strange. Which it meant to me on the scene, investigators were like playing, toss the case, it's like in New York City when a murder happens at the dividing line of a precinct,
Right.
and the precincts argue over whose case it is.
Right.
You know,
It's not mine. It's yours over there. Yeah.
it's your case. Look, it's 2 inches into your county,
Right.
But in this case, it was the SLED and South Carolina Highway Patrol. So if it was ruled a hit and run vehicle accident, then it would very much be the South Carolina Highway Patrol. But the problem with all of this is that all of these investigators should have met together at some location with the pathologist, with the coroner, all together and discussed their findings, not yell and argue from a distance. One of the things I see in this case also was some of the investigators were interviewing people by telephone. That's a no-no. That's 100%. You don't interview people in a serious murder case. You interview them in person. How can you tell their body language and their facial expressions if you're interviewing them by telephone? That's not done. That's amateur. That's, amateuristic. So and there's indications that they did do this, and so that's why when I read so many of these interviews that they have in different locations, it sounds like total he said, she said. Well, investigator. And the other thing is they didn't memorialize a lot of this stuff on paper. It's the old expression in the detective bureau. If it's not on a DD-5, it didn't happen,
That's right. Yeah. You have SLED, you have the Highway Patrol, you have the coroner. Now that person's head, I don't mean to be grotesque and graphic, but the person's, and I've seen people get into car accidents and their head is misshapen, they're dead. That could be from a car. It could be perhaps a severe blow with a couple of severe blows with a baseball bat. But if the skin is ripped open, it may look like a trail from a bullet, hitting, bouncing off the top of the skull and ripping up some of the skin. And fine. In the very beginning, it's late at night, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. You get there and you're like, okay, look at the head. What's going on? Let's find out from the pathologist, where we're at with this case. We have a person who's deceased, but we don't know anything more than that, what the cause of death is. The pathologist should be able to determine fairly quickly if that was that ripping in the skull, in the skin was made by a bullet or something else, like a piece of a car mirror or a truck mirror, something like that. But it's they should have met. If there was a disagreement, they all should have met in an office, spend a little time, go over everything, and come to some sort of reasonable conclusion. And the idea that they would interview people by phone seems to me that they took it as a homicide, but maybe an accidental vehicular homicide or a criminally negligent homicide with a vehicle, but not as an intentional homicide with a vehicle where you're actually trying to murder somebody. And interviewing people over the phone, and it could be, and I have to say this, it could be that perhaps they realized that Mr. Smith may have dated some powerful people and kind of just let it die, let the investigation die.
Absolutely. Kim Alliston, thank you so much for the $10 super sticker, the 10-pound actually super sticker. I know you guys are from Great Britain. And thank you, Kim, for all you do for this channel. You're a mod. You're one of the biggest supporters of Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. And Andy the Gabby Cabby, thank you so much. And folks, if you haven't watched Andy the Gabby Cabby's podcast, please do. Andy, thank you so much for the 10-pound super sticker. Very much appreciated. This case, it's just here. Here's Andy the Gabby Cabby. How can a family have so much influence over law enforcement? What happened to the oath you take to protect and to serve? Well, Andy, they were law enforcement for 100 years. They were the district attorney in this area. So they had great power and great influence over this town, which included with law enforcement. So when the Murdochs were on the scene, people crossed their T's and dotted their I's, but made sure that they didn't do anything to offend these extremely powerful people, because they know where the bodies are buried. Trust me. Some of them they even put there. So you got to be, they got respect, not just because they were lawyers, but because of their reputation. So it's, you heard Eric Bland say that the Murdochs had a stranglehold over this town, that people feared to talk because of them. So what is that does that lend to more sort of hearsay and evidence that maybe other things happened here that was a bit, and I'll use that old word from New York word, fugazi. There's something fugazi here that isn't out in the open here. Mike?
Yeah. The fact, just the fact that members of the Murdoch family showed up on the scene like a little after 4 a.m. means that, they probably got the phone call. You don't want to read too much into that, but understand that as attorneys, maybe they're smelling money in the water. Maybe they know the Smiths because through Buster. It could be just a platonic relationship. You could be buddies with a guy who's gay, and it may be this all it is. So maybe they kind of just knew the family a little bit, and maybe they saw it as a scam. We can maybe there's some life insurance money, and we could steal from Mrs. Smith. It could be something as simple as that. But the fact that they would be there at 4 a.m. On a deserted road for a vehicle, what was classified originally as a vehicle accident, lets you know how deeply connected they were with local law enforcement. They were law enforcement, as you said. They prosecuted the cases. They did civil and criminal law for 100 years. They were a very powerful family. You didn't cross them. You wanted to be on their good side. So I could see law enforcement, wanting to work against them in any way.
Mike, we discussed this at an earlier time, that it's totally improper and perhaps illegal for attorneys to show up at the scene of what was alleged to be a motor vehicle accident. And if they're there soliciting business, I think that is a crime. Is that correct?
I don't know if I'm trying to think, like New York State criminal law. I mean, it would be definitely a violation of your ethics as an attorney. But if you interfere in any way, shape, or form with the officers doing their work, or you alter the crime scene by touching something or taking it, well, then that would definitely be a crime. But obstructing governmental administration and things like that. But just the mere fact that they were there, it raises troubling questions. Now, the problem is now you have to answer those. You have to do an investigation. Where's the connection between them? Was it a phone call? Or was it more than a phone call? Was somebody doing them a favor? And how does evidence from the scene walk off? And how, when the body's taken to the hospital and it goes to the morgue, where's the clothing? It wasn't even if you thought it was an accidental vehicle or a criminally negligent vehicular homicide, why wouldn't you hold on to the clothing? Why, all of these things were just let loose, and we have to live with the Smith family, and everyone has to live with what has happened. You can't recreate it in the past, and that's unfortunate.
Well, Mike, another question, and I'll play devil's advocate. If someone strikes something in the road and they don't know what it is, and they look around and they think it may have been a deer or something,
right,
and they leave, that's not a crime.
No. If it only if it's a motor vehicle accident with like another vehicle or you injure someone. But if you actually think you ran over a raccoon, 3 o'clock in the morning on the parkway or something like that, a squirrel, no, you don't have to report that. But I think if you did hit a person, you'd probably be able to, I mean, deer can come right out of the blackness, right across your path with only your lights on and an unlit road. They may be startled by you, and you might barely have a split second to see them. And but a person, you're definitely going to have a lot longer to see them in the road. And other than that, I'm not sure a person could possibly reasonably, and especially wanting someone to believe them, that they hit a human and didn't know that it was a human.
Right.
Yeah,
I think they would have to at least due diligence,
Yeah.
stop and check out and see
Yeah.
what you may have. If people in a dark road, someone may be reluctant to do that out of fear of
Fear.
maybe other animals or people
Sure.
around, that type of thing. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime stories from a police perspective, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, and please make comments. We love reading your comments. We try to respond to all, pretty much 80 to 90% of all comments. Sometimes there's so many of them, I can't respond to all of them, but I try. And Mike Geary loves the love that he gets, because most of what he gets is love. I don't get all love, but Mike loves to read them too. We also have a Patreon with 3 different levels. And if you want to support us financially, you can go on our Patreon. And we have a YouTube with 5 different levels. And you see the folks in the green font, they're part of our YouTube family. Char, thank you so much for the $20 super sticker. So much appreciated, guys. We really appreciate all your support. We're just about hitting 48,000 subscribers. Sometimes you zoom forward a bit and then you back up a little bit and you fight for every inch, but we appreciate all your support, guys. How did all the rumors start in regards to a relationship between Buster Murdoch and Stephen Smith? And I'm going to play a little bit of Dan Abrams. This was on the other night, and this will be explained a little bit.
About a possible relationship with Buster come from? Was it friends of Buster's? Was it friends of Stephen Smith's? Joining me now is Anjanette Levy, correspondent and host for Law and Crime Network. Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it. All right, so where did these rumors come from? Who's the one suggesting this?
Well, Dan, thanks for having me. And the rumors really started back in 2015. People went to Sandy Smith, Stephen's mother, and said, hey, I heard that Buster and Stephen were in a relationship and that Buster was trying to keep this under wraps. And it seemed to spread like wildfire. Hampton, South Carolina is a town that has about 2,700 people in it. You know how things can go in a small town. Buster and Stephen also went to high school together. If you think back and look at the timeline here, they would have just graduated high school in the last year or so when Stephen was killed. They were also on the same baseball team. And it's my understanding, Dan, that Randy Murdoch, the uncle of Buster Murdoch, was actually their baseball coach. And he also represented the father of Stephen Smith in a workers' comp claim. So we've got a small town here, and rumors spread like wildfire. Sandy Smith wrote a letter to the FBI back in 2016 saying, this is what people are telling me. They come up to me and say these things, and things just unfolded from there. And as you mentioned, Stephen's name, or Buster's name rather, is mentioned along with the Murdoch name several times in the investigative case file because the state troopers were looking into those rumors.
Now, Buster Murdoch doesn't have any obligation to deny a relationship with Stephen Smith. He has denied that he was in any way involved in the murder of Stephen Smith, but he has not, has he, addressed any of these rumors about a possible relationship with him?
He did say there were vicious rumors being spread about him and that they were all false. And then he later on admitted, or in the statement, denied unequivocally any involvement in Stephen's death. So
Right.
he talked about vicious rumors. So I kind of, that led me to believe he was also addressing this whole thing about him having some type of relationship, some type of sexual relationship with Stephen Smith.
I want to play a piece of sound. This is, again, Jim Griffin, the attorney for Alex Murdoch, on Chris Cuomo's show, talking about why Buster Murdoch decided to come out and deny any involvement.
The situation that Buster found himself in was the longer he stayed quiet, the more this story got legs. And he struggled over time as to whether coming out and denying the obvious that he had no involvement in Stephen Smith's death would just give oxygen to the flames of the story. From this point forward, anyone who's reporting and putting Buster's picture adjacent to Stephen Smith's face when there's stories of exhuming his body is doing it at their own peril, because it's clearly defamatory.
Well, it's definitely defamatory if someone is suggesting that he was involved in the murder. But it is a fact, is it not, that the reason, and this is the important point here, the reason that this link was made at all is because we now know of this letter that you mentioned, right? That was actually written by Stephen Smith's mother in 2016.
Well, that's not the only reason we know about it. She wrote this letter to the FBI because she felt like her son had been murdered and that it wasn't being taken seriously by some authorities. Obviously, troopers with the South Carolina Highway Patrol believed Stephen Smith was murdered. If you look in the investigative file, Dan, that night when they discovered his body in the road, they believed he had been shot in the head. The case notes say they believed this was a homicide. Then the pathologist who performed the autopsy hours later said, no, it's a vehicular hit and run. Well, nobody bought that, not even the county coroner. But the rumors really started because people in town were saying this and then went to Sandy Smith. And then investigators were also getting that same information. So there are all these recordings in the case file where people talk about this rumor. And those recordings are actually featured in the Netflix documentary.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, look, again, just because people were saying it doesn't mean that it's true. And
What do you think about that, Mike? I mean, look where all these rumors come from. But again, it's very easy now for all these investigative agencies to now say, we told you back then. But whoever was in charge of this investigation did a terrible job. If they all knew these things then, they didn't. What do they say? Hindsight is 2020. You know, because if they knew this then they should have done something about it. And they didn't until fast forward to 2021 at the murder scene. Allegedly, they found something at that scene that implicated the Murdochs in this murder. That's what was said to us, right? Right.
That's right. And SLED made a big deal. They made a public announcement that they were going to open up the investigation into Stephen Smith's case as a homicide. Now, the Murdochs, I guess, have always been, in some ways, the family that people love to hate down there. You fear them because of their power, but you also hate them because of their power, and you want to be on their good side. And so, Mrs. Smith, I'm sure, is being very earnest when she wrote that letter to the FBI saying, the law enforcement people here are not really taking this seriously. I'm hearing from many, many people that, Buster Murdoch is involved in this. And I'm sure she actually heard these things. She wasn't making it up. And the problem is, as the announcer said, the people would call up Mrs. Smith and say, I heard from someone else. So the rumor's going around and around and around and around. You're not sure where it begins, but people are spreading it, and they're spreading it around to each other. And after a while, it becomes almost like it's a fact. And then they tell it to Mrs. Smith, and a number of people tell it to Mrs. Smith, and she sees it as a fact. And it's a disservice to her. And if it takes away from the focus, for law enforcement, and puts it on Buster when it should maybe be somebody else. I don't want to advocate for Buster, but if he actually is factually innocent of this, then it's a total disservice to him. But it's a hot potato. It was a political, my guess is it was a political hot potato between the various law enforcement agencies. Nobody wanted to really run with it. And they were all probably very happy to let it die. And we hope that there's some justice for Mrs. Smith, but like you, I don't know. You can't recreate the past.
Absolutely. I want to play a little bit of Sandy Smith, Stephen Smith's mom, speaking about this on Law and Crime.
I mean, I just love my son. And since I couldn't protect him, I'm going to fight for him.
Nearly 8 years after Stephen Smith was found dead in the middle of a Hampton County road, his mother, Sandy, wants an independent autopsy conducted to find out how her son died.
I want to thank everyone who's donated and supported us from the beginning. But I hope to find the real reason for Stephen's death.
Sandy Smith enlisting the help of a new legal team to ask a judge to exhume Stephen's body.
We're going to hire experts who are going to come into this case with a fresh set of eyes, with an open mind. This is not a Alex Murdoch 2.0 or any Murdoch 2.0. This is a Stephen Smith 2.0. It's all about Stephen.
I'm Anjanette Levy, and welcome to Law and Crime Sidebar Podcast. Stephen Smith was just 19 years old when he was found.
All right, we know the story, we know the history of this, but again, the attorney Eric Bland, every investigation that you're going to reinvestigate, it's just like a cold case. Where do you start? You start with the notes of the investigators that were on the scene that night. You start with all the people that they've interviewed. You start with all the forensic evidence that they have. You start with all the electronic evidence that they have. You're not going to reinvent the wheel, and, Eric Bland can say we're going to reinvent the wheel, but they're not going to, because this happened almost 8 years ago. So you got to pick it up from where it was and then make, a hypothesis. You got to make an investigative direction. Which way are we going? Is this in fact a motor vehicle accident, or was this blunt trauma? If this is blunt trauma, it looks like someone hit him with a bat. That's going to be really even almost more difficult to find out, because we're hearing right now, all they have is he said, she said, rumors, like someone in the chat just said. It's like playing telephone. Mm-hmm. It is. It really is like playing telephone. And you can't, solid evidence would be cell phone evidence. Do they have cell phone evidence? That is very, very powerful. But we don't know at this point if they have that.
Yeah, this, as you and Phil know, these are cold cases, and cold cases, detectives might look at, 20 cold cases in a year, and maybe they're lucky if they could possibly get any sort of conviction out of one of them. Just because people open up a cold case doesn't mean that with a fresh pair of eyes that, oh, absolutely, we found the missing piece of evidence. Oh, here it was. We didn't know about it. A fresh pair of eyes is great. But as you say, you start out with where everybody left off, and you got to live with the mistakes that were made and missing evidence, and the odds of them bringing somebody in handcuffs for murder, let alone like an accidental vehicular case, car crash, is slim to none. And I don't want to see them, Eric Bland, and getting everybody excited and maybe overpromising to Mrs. Smith. And that's the saddest part, is this poor lady, wherever wherever the evidence leads, that's justice, whether it leads to a conviction or whether it leads to the idea that it'll never be determined. That's going to be it. And the poor lady, I hope is not, getting her hopes up to say this is going to lead to justice in how she wants to see justice. I'm not so sure.
This was on Cuomo the other night, and he, of course, that's where I got the two persons of interest in Stephen Smith case, and they reported it as if it was breaking news. They knew this in 2015.
Breaking news in the investigation of the mysterious murder of Buster Murdoch's former classmate.
That just makes me laugh. Breaking news. They knew about that in 2015. How is this breaking news?
It's breaking news to him.
Yes.
Mate Stephen Smith. Authorities in South Carolina have named 2 persons of interest. And guess what? Neither one is named Murdoch. Joining us now, defense attorney Mark Garrigus and prosecutor David Arenberg. It's good to have you both. Before we go through the names, the idea that the state trooper who came upon the scene of Stephen Smith did not think it was a hit and run. But here's a new nugget of information. The pathologist who did the autopsy theorized Smith was hit in the head by the side view mirror of a passing truck that did not stop. What do you make of that assessment, Mark Garagos?
Well, that could be consistent with them not believing it was a hit and run because in order to have a hit and run, obviously somebody has to be aware of the hit. So that would not surprise me. What does surprise me about this today is that at least so far what's been reported by putting out the names of these 2 people of interest, at least it looks like it's based on uncorroborated double hearsay. And it's unfortunate that for those 2 people who've been identified.
You know, I just want to say the 2 persons of interest, they've never been spoken to. They can't find them. So it's like, how is this even being like, this is all based on double and triple hearsay. So breaking news, 2 persons of interest, that's a shame to say that. It's really not even, it's crazy to say that it's breaking news. There's 2 persons of interest. They've never been interviewed by the police.
Yeah, hearsay is great to give cops a tip because obviously that's how you get a lot of tips, whether depending on if you're investigating a homicide, robbery, burglary, whatever. It's great to have somebody said something, but you check it out, and you check it out, and it's not going to be considered, that itself, the statement itself won't be considered evidence of guilt. And as you say, you can't find these 2 individuals. It's 8 years later. I'm sure they'll lawyer up. Nobody should get their hopes up over this.
No, I agree.
I suppose law enforcement is looking to see if anybody knows anything, but that's still going to follow these 2 people around for quite a while.
So one of them, the father of one of them, Dave, says he heard that the other one who's named was driving the car that took out Stephen Smith. How compelling is that?
I'm with Mark on this one, Chris. There are a lot of weird connections here that don't totally add up. Apparently, both of these individuals that are being mentioned as the new suspects were involved in various legal actions tied to the Murdoch.
Again, how are they named as new suspects when they knew they're on an investigative report from 8 years ago, or 7.5 years ago when this occurred? So how is this new? It's not new information. Why is it being reported as breaking, brand new? It's not. Stop. Report the truth.
Murdoch family in the months following Stephen Smith's murder. And the tip that went to police came from Patrick Wilson's stepfather. So one of the individual's stepfather. And who told the stepfather to alert police? But Randy Murdoch.
Boom. Boom. How do you like that one? Double hearsay. And right. The stepfather was told to report it by Randy Murdoch.
You can't go to the bank with that statement. This is double, triple hearsay. Where's the father now? The stepfather now? Where's the individual who was named? You have to interview Randy Murdoch. Did you say that? Sort of thing. 7 or 8 years ago. It makes for great theater, and you can make a great movie out of this because it's so strange. But going into a court of law with that, you have to develop that information into evidence. And right now it's just hearsay.
Mike, one of the interesting things, and not to ruin the reputation of Stephen Smith. We all know he was gay, and apparently his sister said that he was working for an escort service.
Yes.
Both one on one from Craigslist,
Yes.
and one actual professional escort service. So there is some truth. Now that has to be dug into. Now, whether that escort service still exists, or was someone implied here that he was with some powerful people from that area, that has to be definitely has to be followed up. That is an angle that investigatively you have to either open that door or slam that door shut, because the very guy they're talking about who gave the double, triple hearsay is saying that the persons of interest hit him with his car. I thought it wasn't a car accident. So they're saying double, triple hearsay. He ran him over with his car. Wait a minute. We're just understanding that the investigators are saying this is not a vehicle accident. So this guy giving the double and triple hearsay of these two persons of interest, by the way, Cuomo just listed one of them during his show.
Right.
And reported that there was two people of interest. He only mentioned one of them. How is that even? That's not evidence. That is totally not evidence.
No. This is, we've talked about this many times. This is the study of the victim, the victimology. Go back into what they were doing in there before they passed away. Who's the last person to see them? Do they have a beef with anybody? Do they owe anybody money? Are they blackmailing anybody? Did they break up with someone? Did someone threaten them? Do we have any sort of evidence of any of those things? And working as an escort for off Craigslist or for some other company, I doubt you're probably going to get a lot of information from them, if you could even find them, and if they have any sort of records that they would still even keep after 7 years. Good luck with that. This is where people get tight-lipped, and unfortunately 7 years going on 8 years now, it doesn't lead to a lot of good investigation at this point, because you're dealing with 7, or if you get anybody to talk, it's at least 8 years old, 7.5 to 8 years old.
I find this, I'm going to play, this was on Banfield the other night. I mentioned it earlier that a rape kit was, they did a rape kit on Stephen shortly after his death. If that was a vehicle accident, I have never, ever heard of a rape kit being done on a vehicle accident. So what was the pathologist told? Because that's who would do the rape kit. What was it? What was she told that made her do a rape kit? That's why I said the investigation to this autopsy, this examination, has to start with the pathologist, whether you think she botched it or not, and which she probably didn't. Maybe she botched without talking to investigators the theory of what occurred, and it didn't match perhaps the evidence. But let me play a little bit of this.
The best way to burn fat and get in shape. It's not keto.
Sorry, I got the wrong one. I got. We could all use to lose some fat, and me included, but that wasn't what I meant to play. So I mean, here I pay not to have commercials on this, and then they play this commercial. So does it make any sense to you that they did a rape kit on this case? It makes no sense at all. Let me play this now. Okay.
I couldn't understand for a moment why I heard on a hit and run, or even a suspected hit and run, within 13 hours, a rape kit would have been ordered. Have you, in your line of work, doing this kind of high-level investigation, ever seen anything like that?
When it comes to traffic accidents, never. This was the very first time. I did not have an understanding of why it was being ordered. We were not notified until later that it had been ordered. So no, I have no answers for you to why they would order a rape kit for what would be suspected as a hit and run, which it wasn't, but I would never understand that.
And the rape kit was ordered within 13 hours of the discovery of Stephen's body. Yet in that same time frame, if anybody thought this was anything other than a run-of-the-mill hit and run, you would have been called in with the MATE team.
Correct.
to do further investigation, and yet you were called off and a rape kit was called in. Does that square at all?
No, ma'am, it does not. I was puzzled and confused from start to when we actually got to finally pick up the case, why we weren't given the opportunity to, be a part of it from the beginning.
Was Mate and your team, or even the South Carolina, highway patrollers, were they ever given any information on what the rape kit yielded or where it ended up?
I know it ended up with SLED, but we were never given any information of the results, or I was not until I retired. Now, they may have an answer now, but as of 2018, we were never given any information of what the results pending, whether it was negative or anything of that nature.
Why would they give them information when they weren't investigating the case? Wouldn't they give that information to SLED? Now, SLED is in charge of the case. I think they took it over after it was determined perhaps that it wasn't a motive. But this is so confusing, because what was the actual date and time that it was determined not to be a motor vehicle accident? That's not clear to me. And how it was handed over to SLED, because that's who would have the information on the rape kit. But why would you tell the highway unit about a rape kit if they weren't investigating the case any longer?
Yeah, Billy, the timeline is really messed up, because originally it would be first impression, first look at it. It's a vehicle accident. There's somebody lying in the road. The trooper's impressions about what's this not being a true vehicle accident, and trooper is probably very, very familiar with this, doing accident reconstruction. SLED comes in, they have the technical expertise, they back off within a couple of days when the pathologist makes their determination, and they leave it to the highway patrol. The idea, I've never heard of a rape kit for anyone involved in a motor vehicle accident. The only thing I could think of is that when they made the identification of Stephen Smith, that maybe they realized that he was involved in some sort of escort, and maybe they were looking to see, blood or DNA evidence that may have connected him to his last client. That's the only thing I could think of, and that maybe they were looking to that and try to hook it up with a possible name. But that's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I have a guest coming up who thinks he might have some resolution to that, and it's very distressing, to say the very least. I have other questions I want to ask you about that are equally distressing, and they involve the Murdoch family as relates to this accident. Stephen Smith's father, who's no longer with us, I believe he died about a year after Stephen Smith was killed. Stephen Smith's father called you and had a specific question about Randy Murdoch. What was the question?
So it was within a very short period of time that Stephen's father had contacted me and asked me about the law firm contacting him about retaining their services. He was really concerned why they would be calling and wanted my advice. Unfortunately, our rule is investigators and the police, we do not give legal advice. I told him what I thought, and he basically kind of said in short terms that he was not going to do anything at this point. But it was very unusual to me that within a very short period of time, he was contacted.
And then Sandy Smith had reported that they, meaning Randy, had offered free legal representation to that family within 72 hours of Stephen Smith's body being found in the road. And they didn't have a connection to the Murdochs. They didn't even know what the resolution was yet. They didn't know if it was a hit and run, a murder, and yet a lawyer shows up on their door offering the free legal advice. There was another moment I want to ask you about. Sandy reported that she saw Alex Murdoch and Alex's brother Randy at the actual scene of where Stephen's body was found as she was driving to the funeral home. Would there be any reason at all for two lawyers like the Murdochs, Alex and Randy, to be at the scene of where Stephen was found dead?
We already discussed that, Mike, and it's really strange. And then follow up that they offered their legal services for free. Are they trying?
Yeah.
No, I mean, could it also be that they were trying to cover something up that they
Sure.
peripherally could have been involved in, or not even peripherally involved in, or
Possibly.
someone in their family was involved in?
Possibly they either smell money in the water, which is what they're sharks, and that's what they do, and they're working on a contingency basis. You see these advertisements on TV all the time. No upfront cost to you. If we don't win the case for you, we don't get paid. That's how it works. And it's not like they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, like, oh, poor Mrs. Smith, but of course that's what they'll tell her is like, we're going to give you the best representation for free. Now, either it's solely for money or it's for money and possibly any other purposes to maybe just because they're going to have a lot access to a lot of information and they don't have to pass it all on to Mrs. Smith. They may want to withhold it. So depending on how much you're a Murdoch hater, it does look strange. Absolutely, they're looking for the money, but if they're looking for something else other than that, I wouldn't put it past them. But we don't have that actual bit of evidence that would connect them and Buster to the accident or to the homicide. Unfortunately, we don't have that.
Absolutely. Snug with Pug, thank you so much for the 449 super sticker. Much appreciated. Folks, if you're looking for a good defense attorney in the New York City metropolitan area, then Joe Murray, attorney at law, is your man. Joe Murray is a retired member of the NYPD. He was a police officer, and he's a fabulous defense attorney. You can reach him on his cell phone at 718-514-3855. You can email him at joe@jmurray-law.com or his website, jmurray-law.com. Joe Murray is a huge supporter of Police Off the Cuff, and we really appreciate Joe. And we actually miss having him on the show as a talking head of ours, but he's so busy. This commercial is so successful that all he does is work. So he's doing a great job out there defending his clients. Mike, we started off talking about, the body being exhumed, and we put Eric Bland on talking about you're going to have fresh eyes, fresh ears, fresh investigators, fresh pathologists. But we also spoke about how we don't think that that's going to, give necessarily a fresh look to what occurred here. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're dealing with a cold case that's 8 years old. Excuse me, 8 years old. And you have to deal with the fact that it may not have been done very well from the very beginning, and the evidence is gone. People's memories fade. People move from the area. People can change their testimony. If you re-interview them, maybe they'll say something the same. Maybe they'll say something else. We see a lot of the TV shows on, and I love them when they solve a cold case and you finally get justice for somebody. But the ones you see on TV, that's the 1 out of 20, 1 out of 30, 1 out of every 10 or 50, or whatever the number is. It's a low number. The vast majority of the cold cases that are reopened and reinvestigated don't come to any sort of fruition where an arrest is made. It'll be inconclusive. And I think everyone has to prepare themselves for this. And I hope Mrs. Smith, I'd love to see justice wherever it leads her, but I think she needs to be prepared, and everyone needs to be prepared. Even all the Murdoch haters out there, be prepared for the fact that Buster Murdoch may, in fact, not be the person that you think is involved in this case, and be prepared for that. And be willing to accept that and move on.
Absolutely. Michelina Sereno, thank you so much for all those blue hearts. Very much appreciated. Dawn Marie, thank you so much for all you do for us. Dawn Marie is an excellent moderator also. We really appreciate you. Kim Allison, of course, one of our top fans, a great moderator and a great, she prays for us all the time too, which I like. That's everyone could use prayers every once in a while. So, guys, it's difficult. There's not a lot of solid physical evidence in this case, and then to come into the case 7.5 years later and with a fresh look, fresh eyes, fresh this, fresh that, it's not going to be easy for them. Look, the determination was changed and it was made into a homicide. And that simply means death caused by another. Now they have to prove whether it's criminal, how it occurred, who did it. That's going to be the hardest part of it. So we're going to keep following this, guys. 8 o'clock, Duty Ron goes on the air. Crime Time with Duty Ron. He's got the fantastic crime scene detective, retired Detective Ed Wallace. And he has a real-life pathologist going on. They're going to talk in a little more depth than we did. We're not scientists, about the autopsy and about what that's going to mean in this case. Mike, final thoughts, and then we'll.
Yeah, just for everyone, be patient, and these things are obviously take time, and just be willing to be willing to accept the fact that we might not get a satisfactory answer in this case, even with the best of intentions and great investigators looking over a case that's 7 years old. We have to be willing to accept the fact that there might not be any closure that gives us any sort of satisfaction.
Absolutely. Well said, Mike. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. On behalf of myself and retired NYPD Sergeant and Professor Mike Geary, thank you so much for listening tonight.
Good night.
One episode just ain't enough.